Hello and welcome to your go-to Detroit Pistons podcast, The Pistons Pulse, co-hosted by me, Bryce Simon of Motor City Hoops, a former D1 Hooper and current teacher, husband, and father of 3 amazing kids.
And I'm Omari Sanko for the second Pistons beat writer for the Detroit Free Press.
And of course, we're always blessed to be joined by our producer, Wes Davenport. If you guys did not join their live stream over on DBB last night, it's over there still. Go to the YouTube channel. Even if you don't want to watch them covering the other 29 picks, which they did and you should, you can watch them as they covered the Pistons selecting Ron Holland number 5 overall. And I was over on Game Theory with Sam Vecini. Same thing. We have it all chaptered out. You can watch just the Pistons one or whatever picks you want to see our live reactions to. Real quick, before we get started, Omari, let me give my little man a shout out. He turned 5 today. So happy birthday to Royce, who is
birthday, Royce.
He is dealing with me going on. I just got off the radio. Now I'm doing this. I got to cover the second round live this afternoon. So he is dealing with me doing NBA draft stuff on his birthday, but wanted to give my little man a shout out.
I'm happy for Royce. 5 years old is a big age. That's he's he's in that stage of life where he's like just becoming cognizant of everything around him. You know, like 2 years ago, did he know what the NBA draft was?
He still doesn't know what the NBA draft was. Like he has no idea what's going on. It's I love doing this. Here's what's fun. I think Ro asked me the other day, like, Dad, are the Pistons ever going to be good? And I'm like, man, son, you are a Pistons fan already and you don't even know it. So God bless you.
Ro was born what year?
Ro is 9. He will turn 10 in October. So
yeah, I was like, so he's like since 2015, like he was born on like the tail end of like the Andre Drummond era, and like he has no semblance at all of like a good Pistons team, which is interesting. Maybe that'll change. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. Hopefully they can grow up and see. Here's the thing. Rowan has gotten Chiefs success, so he's already spoiled as all get out because of that. So Rowan is doing fine whenever it comes to his sports fandom. But
I'm always jealous of kids who get born with like good football teams because I have to wait till I was almost 30 for that.
Yeah. So, and that's what I did not get that as a Chiefs fan. I had to live through a lot of struggling years and heartbreaks and all of that. So yeah, God bless Rowan. It's close enough, YouTube user. It's with an E, but close enough. So appreciate you guys. I'm already losing. I'm scared, Omari, for the second round this afternoon. I could feel my voice going last night at the tail end of the first round, and then knowing what we had today and how excited I get. I'm excited about the second round, but I'm really nervous that my voice is going to go about halfway through the live stream this afternoon. But here we're talking about Ron Holland. We're talking about the number 5 pick. Here's how we're going to do this, guys. We're going to talk just about Ron Holland as a player with no Detroit Pistons context to start this off, because once we get into that, it's going to get convoluted into what does it mean for Jaden Ivey? What does it mean for Asar? What does it mean for Trajan Langdon? What does it mean for Fred Vincent? And I just don't want us to get down those rabbit holes immediately before we just talk about who Ron Holland is as a prospect, as a player. So Omari, I'll let you start, and then we'll just riff back and forth how we look at him and how we evaluated him coming into this.
Yeah, I feel like I've always been pretty transparent that like I'm a Ron Holland fan. I like his game. I didn't really quite understand why he was falling in mock drafts, which some of that was just workout related, but I didn't see him going 5, and I think that was probably the first big surprise of the night. But just on Holland as a player, like I think he's the exact type of guy you take a swing on in this draft if the plan is to take a swing in this draft. And the reality is that he pretty much has everything you want in a modern wing except the shooting aspect. He averaged 19 a game, 2.5 steals, about 7 rebounds. He moves the ball. I don't think he's like a primary initiator type guy, but he moves the ball like in transition. You can trust him to like find, the cutter or somebody spotting up. But he's just super, super athletic. Like I think he has a very natural handle, and I think he just gets to the rim with ease. Like he can finish through contact, he can finish around people, he can finish through people. He's kind of wiry, strong. I just like he's 18, like he's still 18 on draft night. Like, I like young prospects and their upside. And yeah, like he can't shoot. And I think that's obviously the big if. Like it's a wing who has everything but the shooting. And we see so many of these guys go top 10 every single year. And a lot of them never really figure the shooting out. But Ron, like this is a guy that came in with like a sterling reputation. Like he won in high school. Like he was seen as a potential number 1 pick. And he just happened to be stuck with the worst G League Ignite team of all time, which there's only been like 3 or 4 Ignite teams. So it's not like that's like a huge accomplishment. But they went 2-32, so it is a huge accomplishment in that sense. But I like Ron. I think he's a great upside swing. I think he has everything you want in the wing. And I'm curious to see just sort of how he settles in to this roster. Bryce, I'm curious to see how you feel about Ron as a prospect, because I know we've talked a lot about it in like a Pistons sense. But just overall, do you see him as like a valid top 5 pick in this type of draft? Because I do.
Yeah, I do. I don't think the value here is wrong by any means. We'll talk about the fit a little bit later, and I think that it's a real conversation. I don't want people to think we're going to dodge the fit conversation and the floor spacing conversation and what does it mean for Ivy and Asar. I don't want to dodge that stuff because it's real. It's part of where we're at right now in this draft. But I had Ron Holland very high on my board at times throughout this process. And I've said over and over that if you ask me for a two-way wing, which is an insane archetype for the NBA today, you look for wings that can play both sides of the floor. He's not a 3-and-D wing. Obviously, the shooting is one of the biggest concerns. I just saw somebody make a comment that the feel may be the biggest. I think I may agree with that the feel is a real concern, even more maybe than the shooting. But he defends on the other end, and we'll break this down in even more detail because I have some questions about the defense also. But if you ask for the archetype that may be the most important in the NBA, I think a lot of people would tell you a two-way wing, and I think Ron Holland at the top had the best chance of hitting that. Let's just get this out of the way. Actually, no, we'll save the comp stuff for a second. I'm just going to really quickly read my scouting report for his archetype potential role. Athletic and explosive wing. I don't think he's a forward who has the potential to be a high volume scorer and defensive playmaker. I do believe he'll be mostly off the ball player who you want to create advantage for and then allow him to attack those opportunities. So that's where we'll talk about what he can do with the ball in his hand. Will get the reputation as a quote unquote selfish player based on the assist to turnover numbers, but I believe that to be misleading in terms of that. I think it's more of his feel for the game. Defensively, he's a player that will make plays and be disruptive, but will need to work on the fundamentals of this end to simply be more solid in situations that they ask for. So one other quick caveat, Omari, before I let you kind of respond to that. When you look at Ron Holland's stats, specifically on Real GM, make sure you scroll to the part that says full season stats, because what Real GM does is you have their regular season and your G League Showcase Cup separated out. And then the third one is full season stats. So for the full season, he was 46, 24, 73% from the free throw line, almost 4 free throw attempts a game. And an important caveat with that, Omari, because I know this is big for you, how he pressures the rim. They only shoot 1 free throw attempt in the G League games. And so those free throw attempt numbers are somewhat skewed because of how they do that.
No doubt. And that's, I think, really is probably the aspect of his game that hasn't been discussed enough, is that this guy was really elite at getting to the line in his lone season with the Ignite. And that's a skill that really tends to translate, for a lot of young prospects and tends to be correlated with, being those types of go-to scorers in the NBA. Like guys like Jimmy Butler, like, Tatum, Brown. Most of the good wings of the NBA get to the line, at least at a decent rate. And for, I think, Holland to show that at 18 is very, very promising. But the other thing I really like about Holland is that he has an endless motor. Like, he dies for every loose ball. Like, he's just like the ultimate hustle guy. And I'm going to try to find the stats, and hand it back to you, Bryce. But that's another thing that's really correlated with stardom. Like, you look at, like, just NBA hustle stats, and you'll see some surprising names at the top for, like, diving for loose balls and things like that. But those are just things that stars tend to do. Like, they're very high effort, instinctual players. And I think if Ron Holland had played for like a Duke or a Kentucky or somewhere else, and maybe that raw athleticism, against guys his own age and not grown men shined a bit more, he would have been in that number one conversation from the jump, because you look at his profile and I think he has all the indicators you would want in a young wing who can eventually hit that next level.
Well, I think what's important to note here, and one thing that was screamed about with the Ignite going back to even before the season started, they didn't have a real point guard. They didn't have a table setter. So Ron Holland is going from that to playing with like, if we believe in Cade Cunningham and what he is going to be awesome for Ron Holland in terms of setting him up and the things he can do. So again, I think when you're looking at a potential two-way wing, this is the ultimate answer in the draft. And so you laid out the stats, the numbers, and what he was able to do in that league still, or with that team. He has real twitch and explosion. I think he was one of the more athletic guys, especially in the top 10. Explosive in transition. I will say this, something I didn't necessarily have in my notes, but Sam Vecini actually made the comment last night. He thinks Ron Holland may be one of the best off the ball cutters in the draft. We were talking about Tristan da Silva, and he, made that comment that actually he thinks he thinks da Silva is the best cutter in the draft, but that Ron Holland would also be right there. So that plays into kind of his ability to play off the ball and the value he provides. I think he could be a menace on the offensive boards. I think that's something he could do very well also. We'll get to his defense in a second because I do want to talk about that. I want to ask you, Omari, what do you think about just the jumper and the way it looks? Because even my notes going back to the high school film I didn't think it looked bad. I thought the arm mechanics and the follow through looked okay to me. I thought it looked good with the ignite. It just, the numbers didn't really back it up. I thought he showed touch around the rim whenever he drove to the paint. So I do have a little bit of hope that, again, we won't fully get into the Fred Vincent conversation yet, but that he is going to be able to improve his shooting.
I think so. His makes look pretty good. Like when you see him make a shot, like it's like, okay, like those are workable mechanics and he could definitely replicate this at the next level as long as he tightens up just his consistency and his mechanics. His misses look pretty bad. And I think a lot of it, and I think a lot of it with him is just mechanical. It's just, bad. Like it's stuff that's correctable. Like when I watch his shooting, I don't think, oh, this is going to be like a 2-3 year project. Like
Agreed.
Realistically, he could go into his second year shooting 34-35%, I think. And that's like an 11% improvement. But again, he had to create so many threes just playing with the ignite. And in the NBA, you're not going to ask him like, hey, you're going to take side steps, step backs. Like you're not going to have to do that as much with the Pistons, or I would assume that their next coaching staff won't ask him to do that. As much. It's going to be much more, getting him good, clean spot up attempts, off both feet. And if you can build that consistent base, then, that's probably going to work out pretty well for him going forward. I don't know if he's going to become like a 38, 39, 40% guy, but I watch him shoot. I look at his makes, and I think this guy can get to 35, 36% in a reasonable amount of time. And I actually feel better about his shooting. I won't say I feel better about it. Like him and Buzelis, I don't think are that far apart as shooters. Like Buzelis' shot looks good too. He didn't shoot it that much better, but I think both those guys have correctable jumpers long term.
We'll get into that. Well, when we get to the second segment, we'll definitely talk about that because I want to talk about the other options that were there. I want to sit right here on this question from Willie. What's his immediate role going to look like? And I think this is what's interesting about Ron Holland is because let's just get into the comp stuff that we were talking about. So there's going to be a lot of people that look at Ron Holland and they say, he's going to have the Hamidou Diallo career where athletic, all of those things, but doesn't really figure it out. The field's not great. And he ends up, a few years in the NBA and then he's gone. I think the median outcome that I kind of like, I'm not saying it's 1-to-1 with this player, but is the role that we saw from Derrick Jones Jr., where athletic, makes enough threes, disruptive defensively, those type of things. I think maybe that's the role you see from him maybe in his rookie season with the Pistons. And listen, people are going to freak out here. I get it. I'm not saying he's going to become this, but the ceiling, and put whatever percent you want on it, maybe it's 1%, maybe it's 10%, but the ceiling is going to me, is Jaylen Brown. Like that's the archetype of a two-way wing that could potentially be there for Ron Holland if everything hits right. So yes, and like they're it's a little bit better than Hami. I'm not comping guys. I'm not saying these are 1-to-1 comps. Every player has a floor and a ceiling. So, but there's a percentage that goes with each of those. So that's kind of where I'm at. So for me, Omari, going back to the question is, what do we see early? I don't think they put him in like a Jaylen Brown role, right? Like not to be this awesome two-way offensive. Like I think it's more of a little bit of a Derrick Jonesy type of role that we saw with the Mavs this past season.
I definitely think it's more Derrick Jones Jr. Man, I kind of made this point last night where, people were comparing him to a Sar. And I'm like, well, I think Ron has more guard skills than the Sar. Like, he can make some things happen with the ball in his hands a little bit more. And I think he gets downhill a little bit easier, which for me, like, and we're not doing direct comps, obviously, but Hami is like the absolute floor because I think coming out, he could probably be a little bit better than that. But you talk about Jaylen Brown, and like long term, he does have a lot of those same indicators that make you think, well, he has to live into his game every summer. By year 4, he's going to pop.
Yeah, listen, I see people are really pushing back on this. Yeah, Ron does, but there's real Phil questions, and the reason Hami's not in the league has a lot to do with Phil and not being able to shoot. So if Ron really isn't able to shoot, and he does not have good feel, if that doesn't come around, if that was a real thing, and again, I'm not saying it is, then there's real questions of what the value ends up being offensively. Just like the Jaylen Brown percentage outcome is pretty low, I think the Hamidou Diallo outcome that I'm throwing here is pretty low as well. Most likely it hits somewhere in the middle. I would like to think that the Jaylen Brown... Okay, let's talk about the defense because Diallo played no defense. Here's what I'll say about Ron Holland on the defensive end. I think he plays extremely, extremely hard, and I think he can be real disruptive. I think there are some fundamental things that he has to get better at. He got labeled as like this an elite defensive player coming out of high school. I don't agree with that. I don't think he stayed in front of guys as well as that title would make you think. I don't think he did it as well in the G League as what it would make you think. He just got beat off the bounce a little bit more, but he does give great effort. I think he'll be, with his athleticism, I think he will be disruptive. I do think there is just, if we're expecting him to come in and just lock down on the ball, I don't know that that's what he's immediately going to do. I think there is some, I would disagree with this. I don't think he's the best on-ball defender in the class. I don't agree with that. I don't think that's what he is initially. And I also had some questions. Like, I have multiple notes of him not boxing out and really rebounding and missing rotations and some of those things on the weak side. This is all stuff he can grow and learn, Omari. Okay, he absolutely can. I'm just giving my scout on him and where I think he's at.
Yeah, I think he has one of the best on-ball upsides, but in a draft where you have Devin Carter, Ryan Dunn, like some guys who are coming in and could just truly be like elite guys.
Steph Castle.
This is a pretty solid draft for defensive wings. So I wouldn't give Ron Holland that, but I think if you talk about long-term upside, he could absolutely get there.
100%.
Yeah. I'm going to read this real quick just to get back to my loose ball stats. And some of this is going to be correlated just because these guys play a lot. But in order, here are the leaders for total loose balls recovered last season. And I'll read this because Ron Holland might be the best loose ball guy in this draft. Like, that's a stat that matters. Kawhi Leonard led the pack with 81 loose balls recovered. After that, it's Austin Reeves, Josh Hart, Luka, Anthony Davis, Jaylen Brown, Alex Caruso, Anthony Edwards, Kobe White, Sabonis, Fox. And if you keep going, you get Kyrie, Shea, Devin Booker, Zion, Dennis Schroeder. Like, a lot of names you wouldn't necessarily expect.
Yeah, I would not have. Yeah.
But one thing that really correlates just with being a high effort player is loose balls recovered. Like, all the stars recover loose balls. You look at it, like Steph Curry is in there. He had 55 last season. Like, you would not expect a lot of these guys to be in there, but they just play a maximum effort all the time. And that's Ron Holland. Like, it's not like a massive stat, right? Like, loose balls recovered. You don't think about it, but you look at the guys up there and you do see a lot of toolsy wings who came in with sort of Ron Holland's reputation and ended up developing other aspects of their game. And I think that's what really gives you more confidence with Ron is you talk to people, like, just the way he played. His motor is unbelievable. He might have one of the best motors in the draft. That's one thing you cannot teach. That's another indicator that makes you feel a lot better about his long-term outcome. Like, this guy is going to work nonstop until he gets there.
Yes, I agree with that 100%. And I'm just giving where I think he is right now. Mm-hmm. That's what, all I'm trying to do is give that context. I don't mean to push back as much as I am. Bobby Bucket says, Bryce, compared to Asar, he's a level below that. Then I had a lot of these same concerns. I feel like I was saying the same thing defensively about Asar. And quite frankly, guys, I was a little bit wrong. Like, I think Asar came in and was able to be better defensively and more impactful and more solid than what I thought he was going to be. So, yes, great comment here from YouTube user. Ron and Asar are both good character guys who work hard. I agree 100% with that. So, I I think Ron will get there. I don't think, like, there's a lot of these Herb Jones, Jaden McDaniels. I love those comps. And I don't know, maybe those guys, I'm sure they struggled as rookies too defensively. I just don't think he's quite there yet in regards to a few of these things. I want to keep this conversation going, Omari, just about him as a player, and then we can get to the other stuff. Real quick before we go to the break, we mentioned the Jaylen Brown thing. Wes dropped it, so this is why he's the best in the business. Jaylen Brown rookie stats, just 20 games started, 6.6 points, less than an assist, just under 3 rebounds, 0.6 stocks, which is kind of crazy. I think Ron Holland will at least do that on 45, 34, 69, and 17 minutes per game. So just a little bit of, okay, guys, I did not call him Hamidou Diallo. So please stop yelling at me for saying he's going to be.
Bryce was trying to avoid getting yelled at on Twitter.
I didn't call him Jaylen Brown, I didn't call him Hamidou Diallo. Every single player has a floor and a ceiling. All I'm saying is if he doesn't figure out fundamentally the defensive side, if he doesn't find the feel and he doesn't find the jumper, there is a world where this doesn't work out very well. That's my only point. So, all right, go to.
And Hami's and it's only because Hami played for the Pistons and he's like a go-to that you could, like, you know, people.
I liked Hami too. That's the thing.
Yeah, I like Hami.
I said on this podcast is like, hey man, somebody should. When he figured out he was like this smaller forward type of archetype, like I was like, I kind of like this. I was surprised that maybe he didn't figure it out. So, I'm also like running on very little sleep. It was a long night, so I'm a little more temperamental than I knew.
That's why I'm glad they switched it to 2 days. I have mixed feelings in the 2-day format. On one hand, I got home at like 11 p.m. last night because we were at the PPC. That's where we talked to Langdon, and we had a conference call with Ron.
Yeah.
Like, typically, like, you know, especially when they have like pick 53, you're up till, you know, maybe like 1:30 in the morning too, working just because you don't know what's going to happen. Like, it might be another deal or whatnot. And when the first round ended, I'm like, there's nothing else that's going to happen tonight. Like, we're done. Like, I walked outside and like the birds were chirping. It was like 11 p.m., but like it was just like this joy in the air. And I realized, oh, okay, like now this takes care of Thursday too.
I don't know that I could have done it last night, Omari. I was gassed by the end of the first round. I hope these second round picks, this is a different topic, I hope they give their due, because there's some real prospects here around still on the board. And maybe we can talk about that at the end, because maybe they could make a move and get up and grab one of these guys. But yeah, it'll be interesting. I know people want some of the other stuff, so let's go to break. And if you have some more Ron Holland stuff, we can do that, or we can start to get into some of the other stuff.
All right, we are back with segment 2, and we can start to dive into the Pistons stuff a little bit. Like, we're still going to talk about Ron as a player, but let's just go ahead and dive into the elephant in the room, which is that the Pistons have a team full of guys who need to be taught how to shoot, and Ron really does duplicate some of the things I already had. Like, I still think, I like the pick. I want to emphasize again, I like the pick. I think it makes sense for a team that just won 14 games. But with that, and Ron does have about a 6'10", 6'11" wingspan. For those who are wondering, his wingspan is around 6'11". I think it was like 6.75 or something like that. But overall, when you look at a team that already has Jaden Ivey, you have a star and this and that, I think naturally people say, like, all these guys can't play together. They're going to learn how to shoot, this and that. And that's true. But I also think it goes back to what we've talked about on and off since essentially last summer, which is that the Pistons have so many young guys that you can't commit to all of them anyway. Yep. Like, it may not be this summer where you start to part with guys, but over the next 3 seasons, you're going to have to really make some tough decisions as far as who do we prioritize going forward, especially with Cade. More likely, like, he's going to sign that max extension this summer, and then you have Ivy and Durant due next summer. So you're not going to be able to keep all these guys. So that's kind of how I look at it, right? If you look at this as a 5-year plan, you know, you can't keep everybody, so you might as well just take as many upside swings as you can. But I guess to what extent does Ron Holland just not necessarily addressing needs right now sort of knock this pick back for you compared to maybe, you know, some other directions like a Connect or some of the other guys there? Yeah,
so real quick, we have somebody joining live from Poland, so we appreciate it. And guys, we appreciate everybody in the chat. I love how active it is. Everybody's being pretty congenial here this morning, differing opinions, but everybody's being polite. So I appreciate everybody. We love you. Hit the like, subscribe. If you're listening on podcasts after the fact, all the same stuff as normal. So thank you guys so much, for tuning in and being there. Here's something that was really interesting. So I had somebody really come and talk to me about who were the Pistons going to take at 5 that fixed the floor spacing. So Reza Shea's gone, Sarr's gone, Shepard's gone, Castle's gone, right? So at 5, does Klingon fix the floor spacing, Omari?
Maybe in 8 years.
Okay.
No. Reaches a Brook Lopez ceiling, but no.
No. Does Buzelis?
No.
Does Topic?
No.
Does Tijan Salon?
No.
Does Cody Williams?
Possibly, but probably no.
Low volume.
Yeah.
Low volume, right? So there's questions there. I've even had people push back to me that Devin Carter was, is he a real floor spacer? Because we've only seen 1 year of it.
No, when I suggested that, they yelled at me.
Yeah, no, people hated it.
Yeah.
So, and here's the thing. I had Dalton Connect high. I was obviously wrong because he lasted all the way to 17. So
which was an absolute steal for the Lakers. That's actually, I feel like the league just had a collective, why did he let them get Dalton Connect? But
yeah. So, and I agree, but people are talking about drafting Holland at 5 and not trading back. I mean, we wouldn't have known it if they would have, but I wonder if there wasn't the trade there. That's something we'll talk about in a second. So the guys we're talking about is Connect, who ended up going 17, Jared McCain, who ended up going 16, Jacoby Walter, who went 19, De Silva, who went 18. And so I think my point here is this is a long way of getting to who is the guy you could have taken at 5 that people would have been excited about that actually fixed the floor spacing issues. And here's the other thing. Then we would be having a conversation today if they take Dalton Connect of what, Omari? Who is this team going to defend, right? And Jared McCain, we'd be having the conversation of he's small. Jacoby Walter, there's some defensive concerns as well. So at the very end of the day, I don't know that they were going to solve shooting and floor spacing with this pick anyway. So why not take the two-way upside swing that we've been talking about?
And I made that point on Twitter last night because the main issue that kept coming up with Ron Holland was that we took another guy that can't shoot on the team of guys that can't shoot. And it's that's valid, but you're going to say that about almost anybody they're going to take in his spot. Like Buzelis, not a great shooter. Cody Williams, not a great shooter. In this draft, if you want a shooter, you either want a top 3 pick or pick 15. You don't want to be in that wasteland between 4 and 12 or 13 or whatever, where you have all these, essentially various level of project guys who need to be taught. So that was kind of my thing. It's okay, I think that's a valid complaint. But then people are talking about Buzelis and Cody Williams and these other guys, and it's well, they had the same downside. So really, you're telling me the Pistons should have traded down to 14 or 15 and just took a Connect or a De Silva or Carter or one of these guys who are way more proven shooters, which also would have been a valid outcome. I'm not saying that that's wrong. I'm just saying I cannot knock the Ron Holland pick specifically for shooting when the Pistons were going to take an upside wing that has shooting issues, regardless of who they went to with in that spot, except Dalton Connect. And then it's well, who's playing defense? And it's I think Dalton Connect's a fine pick at 5. It's just if you're banking on the upside, I like Ron Holland over the next 5 years way more than I like Connect. It's not even close. I don't even know Connect what a good team is a full-time starter, which if you do want to be a good team, then, if your 5th pick's a pretty good bench guy, that's fine. I mean, you still need those types of guys, but it's probably a little bit more upside with going with a guy like a Ron Holland. So I just don't put much stock into that he can't shoot criticism at all, because that was just going to be whoever they picked at this spot. You weren't going to get around that, and that's going to be a free agency fix, I think, more often than not. Even with Connect, you're still going to get shooting in free agency because he's not going to single-handedly fix it. So I don't think that's as big a deal in the grand scheme.
So this was from Trader Cause on Twitter, and he hit me up, and it really made me think, because in the moment, I think YouTube user tweeted or mentioned this in the comments earlier, my reaction wasn't necessarily great live on the stream, but it was just because it was really the fit stuff. And we do need to talk about, you can't play him, J.I., Asar, and Duran together. As much as it would be great to see those 5 on the floor together, we'll talk about Fred Vinson in a second. But the more I've looked at it and what they potentially could do there, and maybe this is the transition into the trade back stuff, why they didn't do it and all of that. So we'll go there in a second. But I love our running joke here. Omari, it's 11 a.m. in Brazil, just saying from our guy Matthews. So
I still don't believe that. Like, it's 10 a.m. here. I was 11 a.m. Brazil. Like, I still think you guys are lying to me.
We are not lying to you, my guys. So, all right. Trade back. Because here's the thing. I wonder how people would feel about this if the move would have been made to trade back with the Grizzlies. If Memphis, Clingan was there. The scenario played out that a lot of us thought would play out to allow Detroit to trade back. And my assumption is Memphis was just fine whether it was Clingan or Edey. And so they just stayed put where they were at. Why do you think there wasn't a trade back? What trades did we end up getting? We got the big Minnesota trade, but if that one was complete, San Antonio got out completely. That was a future asset. I'd be fascinated to know if fans would have liked the idea of doing that. But other than that, what other trade ups did we get? Was there any other major ones into that
there was
range?
discussion. Like, I think probably what got the most traction was just Memphis moving up.
Yeah.
But even that, that was just discussion. I don't know if that really got to the point to where, but the Pistons just took Holland and were like, yeah, we're keeping Holland. I think the cost just kind of fell off at that point. If you were going to trade back, the pick would have had to have been Clingan, because that's the guy that everybody was willing to trade up for, which ended up not even happening, which is funny when you look back. He just went 7 and that was that. But if the Pistons wanted to trade back, I think Clingan is the only guy that would have had any sort of weight as far as getting back and picking up an asset in return.
Yeah, that's what it seemed like. Maybe that stuff didn't materialize. I felt like teams would pinpoint their guys and move up to get them, and instead they were able to just sit where they were at and get the guys they wanted to. Because I would love to tune into a Charlotte Hornets podcast this morning. Wes probably did. I'm sure Wes is a Hornets fan now. He probably is leaving Pistons. Yeah, aggregate. If you're going to aggregate anything I say on this podcast, aggregate that the Real West D3, at the Real West D3, is no longer a Pistons fan. He is now a Charlotte Hornets fan. And I'm only doing this because Wes can't defend himself right now. For anybody who doesn't understand, they took Tejan Salon, who Wes called it, though. The fact he went 6, that's justification for Wes in terms of how high he had Salon. So shout out you for that. So we talked about the other floor spacing options, what there was not. The trade back, I just don't think it materialized. Let's talk about the roster here. And this will lead into the Fred Vinson conversation as well. How does this play out? Hal was over on the Game Theory stream the last night, and he mentioned you don't have to play all these guys together. And I agree with Hal. My counter is, though, you kind of have four guys right now that you want to play that can't shoot, and 2 that are complete non-shooters as it stands, and the other 2 are bad shooters at best. I was even going through a scenario, Omari, where, okay, let's take J.I. and Ron and put them in the second unit, but then you still have Asar and Duran in the first unit, and then even if you want to stagger stuff, there's always got to be 2 of them. So do you think it's a bet on Fred Vincent? Or as you alluded to earlier, do you think it ends up being some sort of move where maybe one of these guys gets moved on and then they fill out the roster with shooters in a different way?
I get more and more of the sense that they're going to go into the season with most, if not all, of the young guys. Trajan hasn't shied away from talking about specific fits. After his press conference last Friday, he mentioned that he thinks Ivy and last night, for one, he said that he thinks Ron Holland and Asar can play together. Eventually, obviously, one of those guys will have to learn how to shoot. He didn't shy away from that. And then last week, he talked about Ivy and Kate playing together in the upside there. So he's clearly already looking at these combinations and, thinking, well, how could this work or how could that work? But again, he's also putting a lot of faith into Fred Vinson as a shot developer. And I think that that's really the key in all of this. Is that, Pistons, they've been talking about a shot doctor for so long, right? Even on Twitter, I feel like the main conversation has been, when are the Pistons going to hire a shot doctor, this and that? And now they have one, and he's going to earn his salary. I don't know what the timeline is for these guys becoming shooters, but I will say, when it comes to fit, if any of these guys could shoot, I think you just stop talking about it because you can play any shooters together pretty much. So I'm looking at next season as almost a halfway season between let's move this thing forward and get some good players, but let's also evaluate what we have and figure out where we should invest. And, yeah, the Fred Vincent key in that is really going to be important. The Aaron Gordon talk here, like that's been a big comparison point. Like you have a guy that's an athlete, great instincts, to see somebody shoot, and then you'll be okay. So I'm curious to see how these fit issues like play out long term. We've got some ugly lineups next year, but as they make those decisions, I think it'll even out because I don't think Trey is going to long term try to build a roster that can't shoot. He's the greatest shooter in Duke history besides JJ Redick. Like I don't think that he's going to build a roster that can't shoot. Like he knows how important it is.
Yeah, I mean, I hope. Listen, I don't know how to evaluate Fred Vincent because I haven't been there a part of it. People tell me it's real, so I'll just take people's word for it. He doesn't have to fix all four of them. That's the other thing. We say like, oh, there's four non-shooters. Listen, I don't care if Jalen Duren shoots. Go be really good defensively. I could care less if Jalen Duren ever makes a three-pointer in his career. I don't need to see any of the other offensive stuff. Go be a rim protector. If he gets Holland and Ivy to like right around average NBA catch and shoot guys, and if he can get Asar maybe respectable even just from the corner, this is a completely different conversation if you get the other guys around them that are high volume, quality three-point shooters. Another one here is, where was it at? Patrick says, how much can they get into transition versus scheme? And seems like they could play very aggressive defensively, try to be a havoc team, stay out of the half court on offense as much as possible. I love this idea. I don't know how much that fits Cade. I'd have to think about that a little bit more. But in general, the idea, like if there's one thing Jaden Ivey might do well defensively, it might be that. I think that's absolutely something that Ron Holland does early in his career as he develops the more solid foundational things. We know Asar can do it. And then could you imagine J.I., Holland, Asar getting out in transition with the ball in Cade Cunningham's hands? Like that's the one time on the floor where the spacing isn't quite as big of an issue. So the one thing you have to get with that, though, is a coach that buys into that vision. And right now, obviously, the Pistons, we have no idea in regards to that. So I do think it's interesting. I will say this, Omari. I know they can go get floor spacing in free agency, the trades, whatever. But then at some point, like they have 9 dudes now that I think they would want to give minutes to, right?
Yeah, but if you have 3 floor spacers, then obviously that opens things up a lot. You look at all those guys are plus athletes for one. Like I think we talked about the athleticism aspect for the Pistons for a long time, and Asar, Ivy, Ron Holland, all these guys are going to be the best athletes on the floor to some extent, whether it's Ivy and his speed or just Asar and Holland with their leaping ability. But if 2 of those guys can shoot, and I'll also add that I do think that Trajan is still very much figuring out his roster as well. Like I asked him during the press conference last week, like this was your initial assessment. And he was honest. He was like, I was in the Western Conference, we were in the playoff hunt, figuring things out. And I didn't get to watch his team as much. I think he's still evaluating those aspects as well, which is why I think the trade deadline could be very interesting for the Pistons once you have a 45, 50 game sample size. But again, like you have all these young athletes, you get some of these guys can shoot, you're going to have a lot of positional advantages just off of that. And I think, again, like don't look at next season, just sort of look over the next 2 or 3 seasons and just sort of see the outline of what they're trying to get going here.
We got a comment here. Please don't overanalyze. Like we're literally paid to overanalyze, guys. Like this is what we're going to do. We try to do as level-headed as possible. I know sometimes I get worked up. Omari's the most level-headed person I've ever been around. Like he never gets up or down or whatever. My thoughts are always all over the place. So let's do this, Omari. I would like to talk about some second round names at least. Sure. We don't have to get in depth. I just want to drop some names that are still available at the top and then some guys that may be there at 53 for the Pistons. And then we'll try to answer some questions and close it out after that. So we'll go to a short break here and then we'll finish it off with those things.
All right, we're back with segment 3, and as Bryce alluded to, there are some interesting names in the second round. Like, I don't know if any of these guys will be there at 53, but you look at Johnny Furphy,
yep,
Kyle Filipowski, like these guys who got clear first-round talent that's slid for whatever reason. I guess what's your take on the second-round quality right now? And Like, let's talk about names that could fit as a whole. Like, they have pick 53, but there may be some movement there if you really like a guy.
Yeah, so I would say Filipowski, Tyler Smith, Tyler Kolek, Johnny Furphy.
Yeah.
Those are the big names for me that made it out of the first round. And it was guys like Dylan Jones getting into the first round, AJ Johnson, Bakum Dadier, Terrence Shannon Jr. getting into the first round that bumped those guys. I would love if Detroit was able to go up and get, I think Filipowski would make sense on this team as a floor spacing big. That would be interesting. Tyler Smith, again, a floor spacing forward / big, a little bit more forwardy, but I would like that. Kolek would be a backup point guard if you think they needed that. Furphy obviously makes sense. Some other guys, like I don't know the range for these guys, but I'll give you some of the wings that I like. Justin Edwards, who was a big-time high school recruit, and it just didn't hit, but really kind of embraced a 3-and-D archetype at Kentucky. Bobby Klintman, Melvin Ajinça. I think Cam Christie's going to go before they get there.
I was going to ask about him, yeah.
Yeah, listen, I drafted him in my most recent mock with Mavs draft. I don't think he gets to 53, but you talk about floor spacing. Keyshawn Johnson is a guy like Jalen Bridges. Antonio Reeves is a real bucket. Doesn't defend, but he's a bucket. Quinn Post is a guy I sneaky kind of like because he's an older prospect. He's massive and he spaces the floor. He's, of the names I've dropped so far, I think he's the most realistic to be there at 53. And I would love to see Detroit either draft him or get him in as an undrafted free agent.
No doubt. So you saw some interesting guys down there. Like, I'd be curious to see if a guy like a Cam Christie does end up falling a bit, just because he still is a really raw, really young prospect. And I'm curious to see if teams are more like, we want him as like a two-way guy, or we want to bring him in as like, this or that. Like, I do wonder if his rawness there will kick in. Like, how confident do you feel? And it's the second round, so obviously there's not much confidence, especially that late, that you could get somebody. But are there like back of the second round names specifically that you think could be there, whether it's a guy who could sign a two-way, go undrafted, or is this very firmly like in that back half?
Yeah, like I think there's going to be some names. I brought up Quentin Post. PJ Hall's another guy that theoretically spaces the floor. People brought up Enrique Freeman. That's an interesting name. Isaiah Crawford. There's some names here. I just don't know. Second round gets so crazy, right? Because it's just, do they draft to stash guys? Do they draft guys because they know they're going to take two ways? Those type of things. So somebody asked about Enrique Freeman. Insane intel on who this kid is as a person. So you want to keep adding like workers. He's a little bit smaller, a little bit undersized for what he is, but he's a rebounding machine. He showed some potential to space the floor. I think it was in the game against Creighton in the NCAA tournament. He really showed that ability. So I have some questions about how he's going to score the basketball, but he has really good practical and play strength, really physical box out rebounder, which I always love. May have some versatility as a defender. So there's some names here, Omari. I just have no understanding of where guys are going to actually go. Yeah, Cam Spencer. I mean, listen, Vicini loves Cam Spencer. If he goes to 53 to Detroit, I think he would love that. So it will be really interesting. Yeah, I see some Isaiah Crawford fans in the chat. So there's some names here. I know people love to throw out Bronny James. Like, Bronny James, I feel like he's going to the Lakers at 55. Like, that just seems like the most obvious pick that's going to happen there. But yeah, I'm excited for this second round and even undrafted free agency for the Pistons. Anton Watson is a guy that I like. Zion Poland is a guy I like. I'm definitely talking undrafted free agents now. Reese Beekman is interesting. I'm trying to think some other guys that just really shoot the ball. Those would be some names there as undrafted free agents.
Let's talk about this real quick, and then we can get some questions.
Okay.
One thing I'm curious about with the new regime is how they use the Motor City Cruise. That just has invested a lot into it. I don't know how much they've gotten out of it as far as just an on-court value standpoint for the Pistons specifically. Just when you look at who they've had as two-way guys, and none of those guys have really established themselves as NBA guys quite yet. I know we had a question like, do you think Ron will play for the Cruise next season? This and that. Like, I have no idea. I have no idea what their plan for the Cruise will be. But how many of these guys, but do you feel like this is a draft you could probably emerge with, maybe, a couple two-way guys and they have the tools to really fill in? I guess what's the baseline for that compared to like the average draft where you feel like there's some guys that could really develop in the Crews if they go that route?
Yeah, I think this thing falls off pretty strongly at a certain point for me. And so, again, it depends on how many of these guys that are ranked a little lower go in the second round because for whatever the reason is, or some draft and stash guys that maybe I don't have ranked as high. And do these guys end up falling into undrafted free agency? So I think that's what it'll really come down to. There are going to be interesting names, but the other thing is, like, you have to, the player has to want to come to Detroit. Like, I hate to bring up this wound, but Austin Reeves literally said, no, do not draft me in the second round. I want to go be undrafted and play for the Lakers on a two-way or start his career on a two-way. So there's a lot of those conversations. And so it's just about those connections there and what you're willing to give and those type of things. So I think there are potential names. I just don't know the mechanisms and how easy it is for Trajan and the Pistons to execute those things. And that's why today will be very interesting if they are able to land some of the names I brought up. And just because I like them obviously doesn't mean anything, but it would be pretty cool if they landed a Keyshawn Johnson at 53 and then got Quentin Post in undrafted free agency or something like that. I would really like, some of those names if it ended up there. So.
No doubt. We'll get to some questions. I always like talking about the late second round guys because that's just like, we could just call that the Bryce Simon segment, honestly. Yeah. And check out his draft stuff if you haven't, because I know he's got a lot of second round stuff to inform you for, this.
Listen, I'm excited for today. Like, straight up, again, like, I don't know if my voice is going to hold out or not. I am juiced to do the second round live stream. So if you guys don't have anything going on, I don't believe DBB is going live today, Wes. Thumbs up, thumbs down. They're not. So no competition here today. I can just promote Game Theory. Come over and watch the second round with Sam and I. It'll be a lot of fun.
No doubt. We have about 13 minutes. We could dive into some of the questions here. Starting off with YouTube user, does picking Holland signal that it is more likely to trade some of the young Weaver picks at the deadline? Does it also signal that Langdon is all into a slower rebuild, basically tanking again this year? I think there's a lot we don't know, just given that we got to see how free agency plays out. Like, I'm curious to see who they prioritize in free agency. Like, there's a lot of Tobias Harris smoke. Obviously, they're going to go after shooting. I think it's too early to say at this point. I think a lot of that really just comes down to how well guys develop next season, how they start, and just where the team is looking at the deadline. But with that, like, I don't think Langdon is looking at this process like, we got to get better immediately. Like, if that's your priority, then you don't take Ron Holland. You take Connect.
Agreed.
Or
Yep.
Or even like a Rob Dillingham or some other guy that's going to come in with immediate utility as a shooter. I mean, I don't think Dillingham's a great fit just because he's so small and you have so many guards anyway, but still, like, this draft was not a, we're going to speed this thing up draft to be. This was we're looking at this like a 3, 4, 5 year project. So I think next season really is going to set the expectation for the next 4 years. Like, I think he's coming in with only so much understanding of the current roster. And there's going to be a lot of evaluation, a lot of research, a lot of learning through the first half of next year. But I think that deadline will be some sort of pivot. I won't say pivot point. I will say at that point, he will know sort of what he's working with. And at that point, you probably will see more of a willingness to sort of part ways with what was already built here when he came in.
I will also say, just on the Rob Dillingham front, I think that's a great landing spot for him personally. I think going to the Timberwolves and being insulated by...
I love that trade.
Yeah.
Like, I love that trade.
I still have to figure out the value.
Okay.
The value of some of this stuff. The Denny trade value, I love Denny. I'd be interested to see what Wes thought about the value of that.
Yeah.
He's a Denny guy.
I'm surprised they got 2 seconds and 2 firsts. You would think the 2 firsts would have sufficed, you know?
Yeah, it seemed, but I thought the Mikal Bridges trade was, so I think what I need to learn is this is a premium right now for sellers in terms of the draft capital people are getting back. Why I like that for Dillingham is they have the wing defenders and the rim protector to insulate him on the defensive end. So I think he ended up in a good spot if he is going to succeed. To this, I'm going to give Wes credit because this is not my original idea. I'm stealing it from him on Twitter. I think that this does signal that maybe they're not going to go out and try to get that number 2 guy like Brandon Ingram or some of the people we've talked about, that they do fill this out with role players, because if you're drafting Ron Holland to be a number 2 next to Cade, I don't know why you're drafting him. Like, that should be the ultimate thing. I don't know exactly how Wes worded it in his tweet. I think he said the moving forward, it's kind of hitched to Cade and Ron, or that's what they're building around. Sorry, Wes, I'm getting your words confused here. You may type it into the chat, but I think everybody gets the idea. And I do think I agree with that. If you're taking Ron Holland at 5, it's because obviously you think that higher end outcome is much more likely than the lower end outcome. And if he could be a number 2, then you don't want to try to suppress that by bringing in a BI and having to extend him for $45 million a year for the next 4 years. So I think what this shows is maybe not all the young guys, Omari, but it's still going to be the young guys. And then hopefully some real vets who make a lot of sense to insulate and surround them.
That's my sense as well. You have $64 million in cap space, and you could just go so many different ways with that. Like, you could still, throw $20 million a year at somebody if you want, and still have, 40 plus to maybe take on a bad contract, maybe sign another, wing who could really shoot. Like, you have a lot of flexibility with that $64 million. You could go so many different directions with that. Like Najee Marshall, like that's another, obviously Lane is very familiar with him, right?
We love it. Yeah.
I like sticking to the long-term plan. Patrick says, like, I think you have. So after 4 season, you can't come in like you're ever going to win 40 next year. Like, that's just, like, not only is that mathematically improbable, that also, I think, puts you into a corner if you could overcommit to certain guys early, and now you're kind of stuck in this hole. So I would expect them to slow roll it to the extent that they reasonably can.
Yeah, I agree. And at the end of the day, we've talked about it. You can still improve a little bit, but set yourself up somewhat for Cooper Flagg, Ace Bailey, and some of these guys in the 2025 draft. YouTube user asked about badge contracts they could go after. I just need to go through the league. I haven't got there yet in terms of, we're not going to talk about this right now because we're going to get yelled at. But somebody brought up Andrew Wiggins, and yeah, we're not going to talk about that right now. If we're calling Holland an upside swing, what does it mean for our immediate future? Okay, so we just kind of answered that one as well. Can Ron play number 2 next to Cade if we add shooting at forwards, or is it more close to a 4? So I assume he's saying positionally, not role in terms of number 1 option, 2 option, 3 option. I would say yes. I think he's a 3. I think he's a wing that would move closer to a guard than a wing that's going to move to a forward, the more I've kind of evaluated and watched him. Would you agree, Amari?
I agree, but how would you compare that to Asar? So
I think Asar is a forward.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so we're like aligned in that. Last night, I'm like, I think Asar is much more of a forward, like an off-ball type of wing, and I see Ron as much more of like a 2-3 hybrid on-ball type wing. And I would compare him being paired with Cade to, like, you get Tatum, Tatum in some capacity is going to be a lead guy for you. They take a swing on the Jaylen Brown that could essentially do a lot of the same stuff, but some different stuff as well because he's more athletic and more of an upside swing. So, like, we get into position and all that, and I think the reality is, like, I don't know how much the positions really matter. You want a protecting big. You want 2 to 3 guys in the middle who can shoot and defend. Then you want your playmaker who is Cade. And, I think whether it's 2, 3, 4, like, all that's really just matchup dependent. But in general, I think all those guys can be pretty malleable depending on who you put next to them on the floor. But I think me and Bryce agree that Ron's probably more 2, 3, and Asar's probably more 3, 4 in that hierarchy.
Yeah, we may have talked about this. You just laid it out, but it's kind of like a 1-3-1 roster construction of you have your primary on-ball guy, you have 3, whether you want to call them off-ball guards, wings, forward, whatever you want to call them, those 3, like, let's just call them wings for the sake of simplicity. And then you have the big man. And ideally, like you said, my favorite archetype is a rim protector and stretch, but hopefully he at least protects the rim. And there could be some more nuance in this, but Holland definitely fits into just that wing. As you mentioned, so does Asar. But if you really wanted to get into a 3 or a 4 or whatever, I think there is some difference between those guys. Can we talk about Cade and how much they flesh out this roster to get him some shooters? Yeah, like they have to. Like, we've talked about this. They weren't going to do it in just the draft. So I agree here, Nick. They have to put some floor spacing around Cade, and hopefully they're able to do. I wish I could find the big man that spaces the floor. I just haven't been able to find it in free agency. Maybe there's a trade. Those guys are hard to come by. But yeah, if that wing forward, if they can add some shooting, that would be huge. What vets could help us win games with the current roster? Najee Marshall is a name that we've talked about quite a bit. Let me pull up. Do you have any other names straight up?
Yeah, I do. I actually did I just did a story looking at a lot of the names that they could pursue last week, and I'm trying to pull it up now. But there are like a lot of like mid-range free agents, veteran guys who could come in immediately and I think help this team out. I cannot find my story right now though. But this isn't a good free agency if you want to make a big swing. This is a good free agency if you just want to find some guys who are going to make between, I think 8 and like 16, 17 billion a year. I think just really full of road. Like Najee Marshall, does he get more than 13, 14? Like,
I'm assuming not. Some other names, Gary Trent Jr. is a name. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope is out there potentially, depending on what does with his player option. Gary Harris, Patrick Williams, Obi Toppin, DeAnthony Melton is an interesting name to me. I know Hartenstein.
Yeah, I like Melton a lot.
Yeah, I know Hartenstein is. Listen, Tobias Harris I know is very polarizing, but on the right deal as like a plan B. Kelly Oubre just come off a really interesting year. Tobias Harris could come in and do some of the things they would be asking for or that we're talking about here. Not a long-term answer. I said, but Patrick Million. Oh, I was going to bring up Hartenstein. I think that one gets interesting now with what the Knicks did, because based on the mechanism of the trade right now, they are going to be hard capped at the first apron, which really hurts their money situation. Now, I think they saved some cap last night with all the trades they made, but between that and what they gave OG, Jalen Smith, there's a good name. That's an interesting name there. I've seen that a couple times. Hartenstein isn't that stretch big. And so that's why I go back and forth a little bit with him, because he doesn't do that, even though I love his game. Jalen Smith is a great name there from Big Dog Pistons. That's a player option with him. So, if he doesn't take that, Derrick Jones Jr., we talked about, he's an unrestricted free agent as well. So there are some names out there. I like the idea of just kind of winning on the margins with these. Jonas Valanciunas, I see as a name that people are bringing up in the chat as well.
Malik Beasley.
So
yeah,
these are the names.
I thought about this. Goga Batazde, like if you want a rim protector, like I think he's great.
Yep.
Gary Harris, Buddy Hield, Derrick Jones, you mentioned him. Najee, you mentioned him. Doug McDermott, DeAnthony Melton, mentioned him. Oubre, Taurean Prince, Gary Trent Jr. Like those are all guys who I think fill those roles to some extent.
Yeah, no. So to your point, none of these guys are needle movers, right? No, Omari, none of these guys are second star, but the pick of Holland and what he could potentially be makes it even more sense to just go with these type of role players that fit into these 3-and-D archetypes. So I think this is going to be the path. I was going to see if I could just look through some potential trade candidates. Do we have another? What other questions we have here? Here's one that maybe you would have, Omari. I don't know.
Yeah. No updates right now. Like I haven't heard anything.
You might read the question just for the podcast listeners.
Yeah.
My bad.
Any update on the SAR self? Is he practicing 100% or is he still rehabbing? Will he play in the summer league? Like, I think, I don't have a summer league answer yet. Like, I haven't heard anything to suggest he hasn't been rehabbing okay. But I think the next 3 weeks will be pretty telling as far as where he's at, as far as getting back on the floor. So that's a little bit of a TBD, but, I don't think there's any reason to worry about that right now.
You mentioned Cade Cunningham's extension earlier. I think I actually reached out to Keith Smith. I said, hey, is this Scotty Barnes extension what we should probably expect for Cade Cunningham? And his short answer was yes. So if you guys kind of want to get an idea of what the Cade contract and extension would look like, that is something that maybe, you can go check out what Scotty got. And that might be something that we could be looking at for Cade's numbers. I'm just scrolling Spot Track here. I said it right this time. So everybody that yelled at me and Wes on Twitter about saying it incorrectly, Spot Track. Thank you, Keith, for correcting me there. So I'm just scrolling that and looking at, contracts by size and seeing guys who maybe teams would want to get off of. And there's no names that stand out. I mean, like, is Cam Johnson another name that would be brought up now with Brooklyn wanting to sell off and tank?
It would be I mean, it would be brought up. I think the issue is that the Pistons aren't necessarily buyers in the sense that they have draft picks that they can invest in the prospects.
Yeah.
So, you're probably looking more at like salary dumps than like players who actually have to sacrifice assets.
Same thing with Kuzma there.
Yeah.
There's not. I mean, Tim Hardaway Jr. is the name, right?
Yeah, I did a trade story too. Like, I looked at a guy like a Robert Williams III. Like, he's had injury issues. Portland just drafted Klingon. Like, I know everybody's looking at, well, they're going to have to trade. They're going to have to trade Ayton. But I'm curious to see what happens with Robert Williams. He has 2 years left on this deal. They can just keep him as a backup. Like, he's only making like $12 million a year, just with his injury issues and the fact that they're going to have a roster crunch and the fact that they have to save money. Like, I just wonder if that's a guy that could be a potential salary dump type of target if it comes down to it.
Yeah. So there's some names out there. The Tim Hardaway Jr. one was interesting. He's very inconsistent.
What Kleber too on that roster?
Okay.
I think fit pretty well.
Somebody was like, I think what I saw was like THJ for Quentin Grimes. I'm like, no, why am I including Quentin Grimes in that?
Yeah, I never just keep Grimes.
Yeah, I'll just keep Quentin Grimes in that situation.
Yeah.
I'm good. So I don't know what like the picks and stuff would be there. So, this is interesting with Portland getting Denny as Jeremy Grant, a trade candidate. And for the record there, Wes said he thought the Denny trade was on the high end of fair. And, obviously, Wes is a huge Denny Avdia fan. Fantastic coverage, guys. Is it harder to develop a good shooter or a high energy defender? It seems Trajan
prefers the latter.
Prefers the latter.
Yeah, we could probably close on this one. I'll see other questions. I think it's harder to develop a high energy defender because I think shooting, like both of those aspects are mental, but I think shooting is a lot more mechanical and reps, whereas energy can't really be taught. Like, I think that's just something you innately have or you don't. So that's why after you see guys with motor issues, like, just become high motor guys out of nowhere. Like, I do think there's just some stuff that's just inherent to you as, like, an athlete. Motor's like one of those things that's really tough to fix once you're in the NBA. Or even, like, defensive effort. Like, you see guys who get into, like, very set teams that are contending and have very specific roles and very specific schemes who can, like, do that. But if you come in as like a weak defender, like I would expect Connect to come into Detroit and like become like, this lockdown, like high energy guy when he wasn't that in college. I think that's a lot more innate. Like, I'm curious to see if you feel differently, Bryce. Like, you've played and coached far more basketball than I have, but it's just like you see guys like become good shooters in the back half of their career. It's not as often you see guys that came in with like reputation as a poor defender suddenly just become like lockdown guy. Yeah. Like Brett has dad duties. Like, we're over the clock now.
No, we're good. Usually he doesn't just storm in like that. He's taking liberties today. It's his birthday, so he thinks he can do whatever he wants.
It's his day.
We're gonna have to have a little talk about this after the podcast is over. No, I think the fun comparison here is, does Dalton Connect become better defensively, or does Ron Holland figure out his jump shot? If you're just asking me those two, I think it's probably Ron Holland with the jumper. I will say, like, my view of this is a little different because as a coach, I have way more confidence in developing. Give me the shooters and I will teach them to play defense. Here's the difference, though, Omari. I've coached at a high school level and college and worked with those. Like, that's different than the NBA.
Yeah.
There's a lot of athletic ability that comes into the defensive thing as well. So Ron has those things, the motor, the energy, the athleticism, the length, all of that stuff. And so for him, like I would bet more on Ron developing the jumper, I think, than Connect becoming a even neutral defender, probably is what I would say. That's a really, really good question. Thinking you can teach defense is nuts.
Yeah, like it's just stuff. Like, it's for like we asked Trajan about that last Friday.
Why can I not teach defense? Interesting.
And Trajan was just like, it's just wanting to do it. Like, he was just very clear, like, defense is a want to, type thing. And again, I just think those habits, when you get to the NBA level, like, those habits are you established when you get in, or you establish them immediately. Like, you do see guys come in and just immediately locked down. But to me, it just seems like long term, you're probably better off with a prospect that can really get after it in every way except the shooting, if you think that shooting can be fixed a bit.
I think the easier thing to develop defensively and show is the team defense. I think that's where you can teach defenders and make real growth. Some guys are just going to be limited on the ball, right? Based on athletic ability. Yeah, right. Okay. I don't know. You can teach scheme and technique, but you can't teach defensive awareness. I agree with that.
If you're not if you're not a point of attack guy coming in, like what are the odds that you're just?
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. Right, like if Dalton Knecht can't bend, on the ball against SEC, like is he going to be able to bend and stay in front of guys in the NBA? I think that's real.
Yeah.
Listen, I think you can sit down with guys, watch film, and teach them scheme and where to be and things to recognize, and you can show them, hey, this is where you're missing things. This is what you need to look out for. That's my opinion on the scheme and the tech and those type of things. And I think you can teach. Matthew says technique. There's some technique things that will help people as well be a little bit better in some of those situations.
Like if you're the Boston Celtics, I'm like you probably take Knecht. Like I trust that Knecht will be a solid team defender with the Celtics, but I trust that Holland will be a good shooter with the Pistons. So I think a lot of that kind of comes down to like what infrastructure you have in place as well. Like a bad defensive team drafting a bad defender and saying we need you to become a good defender probably is not a good plan. I think you need some sort of like infrastructure in place to kind of help them make that transition easier.
Yep. All right. Let's cut it off here.
Yeah.
We will be back. I mean, it's Thursday right now. We'll be back either Sunday or Monday, and we'll have a second round. Well, no, we're not going to be back Sunday or Monday. What did we decide? We'll be back. Depends on how free agency plays.
I'll figure it out. Like free agency opens Sunday, so it's going to be very much kind of play by ear next week. It might even make sense to have back on Sunday and just talk free agency, but we'll figure that out. We'll keep you guys posted on, YouTube and Twitter and whatnot.
Yep. We will let you guys know. Thank you for everybody that tuned in. Hit the like button, hit subscribe if you want to continue to listen to what we're bringing. It's an exciting few weeks here between a second round pick today, hopefully at least one, maybe more, who knows. Summer League coming up, free agency, all of that. And then we'll get into the dog days of my fun food takes and lawn care.
Absolutely. This was a good day, I feel like, for our listeners. We get on at 9:30, well, like 9:40. And we are taking people from when they get into the office to their lunch break. Like,
I want to know how many people were at work listening to us, because this is one of my things that I would love to know, that people are legit at work in their office, hiding from their boss, watching the Pistons Pulse. That would be the ultimate compliment to us being a good podcast, is people kind of skipping work to listen to us. There we go. At work. I love it. Thank you.
Yeah, I like it too. Like the idea of people not working, listening to us just makes me so happy. Like keep your jobs by all means. Don't let us get you fired. But I like that. I
mean, you might get fired. It's okay. But no. And if you're listening while you mow your lawn today, I respect you and appreciate you for taking care of your lawn and making it look nice. Team Lawn Care for all of those people. Yeah, we got a few people at work. You guys made my day. Love you guys so much. Home office.
Bryce, I'll let you get the lawn care takes off today. I got way more support than I expected. So.
You always get more support. I don't know what it is. People just have it out against me. It's like you and Wes.
I have I feel like I'm the people's takes. Like I speak for the people or something.
Boss makes $1, I make a dime. That's why I listen on company time.
That's right.
I love it. Let's close it out with that, Omari.
Yeah. What did Shaq say? Got hurt on company time, I heal on company time. All right. Big thanks to our audio producer, Robin Chan, our editor-in-chief, Nicole Avery Nichols, and then shout out to Wes Davenport, as always. We'll talk to you all next week.